Hi, in today's video, we are going to discuss about the sprint planning part. So find the kind of documentation we prepare when we are using confluence. Because as we all know, whenever we are working on the agile environment, so Jira is one kind of project management come bug tracking tool widely used across industries. So along with that, even we use even confluence even because confluence is a document collaboration tool wherein we need to collaborate, right? So wherein what are the documentation required? So what are the scrum ceremonies we follow, like sprint planning, daily scrum, review, retrospections, all this. In this regard, it's always important for us to know about how this sprint planning can be done, right? So how sprint planning we do. Because to do the sprint planning and all, normally there is some practical approach we follow, but end of the day, how this can be written in a form of document, right? So that's what generally something which being a team one should understand. So in this regard, it's always important for us to do some sprint planning, etc. So wherein we need to make sure the following things. So here first we need to, because these are the different TOCs, I can say, table of contents, which will be there in the field of confluence, like wherein we need to do some sprint planning checklist we have to do, right? So at the same time, we need to plan the sprint team members, right? So all these things. Now, when it comes to the sprint planning document, when we are preparing using Confluence as a tool, the first thing we need to mention the sprint planning checklist, whatever the preparations you want to perform, right? So the kind of organizing the backlog, right? So because when there is a project, when we are creating, normally what happened here, you can see there is an option for backlog. So whatever the list of user stories and all, everything was written in the timeline. Normally, everything will be seen in the backlog. This is where generally this backlog comes into picture. So once the backlog issues were identified, so once we have mentioned all these in the backlog, from here, normally the sprint planning will be done. So we have to move some user stories to the sprint. So from there onward, sprint development will be taken place. So before the sprint development, there must be some sprint planning has to be done. So wherein we need to mention all the checklist in context to the sprint planning as it come to the from the context of the preparation, meeting, follow-ups, right? So we need to be updated everything in this regard. Next, sprint team members. We need to make a list of team members. Means I am talking about role specific, right? Either it normally when we are working on the sprint planning, even this will be initiated by the product owner, because what is that they want in this particular sprint will be explained by the product owner. Based on that effort estimation, by understanding the business complexity, technical complexity, right? So business value, everything will be managed by the technical team. I mean to say development team. At the same time, even Scrum Master will also make sure whether whatever the calculation in terms of effort estimation taken by the team is right or not, right? So this is all something where we have to make a list of team members who are in the sprint. So those details has to be mentioned in this. So once we have updated all the sprint team members and all, here we need to write down the sprint planning items. What are the planning items do we have? So all these things has to be mentioned over here. So once it is mentioned, the next we need to go for an agenda. Because for what purpose generally sprint planning meeting we are going to conduct, and because there must be some agenda points, so that we have to be updated. So because otherwise if there is no agenda, so whatever the planning of the sprint we do may be sidelined, because whatever the desired results we wants to achieve, we may not have the possibility to reach the desired results what they want, what we wants to achieve in. That's the reason why agenda is one of the key and important factor which we have to be updated, right? So we need to update the agenda points over here. So once we have identified the agenda points, the next we need to mention the previous sprint summary. Do remember, if we are doing this for the second sprint, because first of its kind, we are doing the first sprint, then we don't require all this. Okay, because there won't be any first sprint as such, because there are multiple sprints. For example, now we are planning the second sprint. So the previous sprint summary will be mentioned. But point to be noted, when we are doing sprint planning for the first sprint, we don't require all this because we don't see any sprint earlier. This is the first of its kind we are doing. So there won't be any sprint theme or something of that sort. So if it was a second sprint we are planning now, in context to the sprint planning, whatever the sprint one which was done by us, right? So whatever the team was identified or whatever the points, let's say, for example, in the first sprint, we have taken 10 story points to be completed. So we have to mention whatever the review of story points which was taken in the previous sprints. And sometimes there is end of the day, we have to make sure the 10 story points has to complete in reality. But sometimes it won't happen, right? So because sometimes sprint 100% story points won't be done, right? So because there is a possibility where team has completed only 8, right? So 2 story points were left. So that we have to make sure the status we have to mention in context to the story points followed by the summary, etc. Everything has to be updated in the previous sprint summary. Next, we need to mention the start date. So when we are going to start the sprint and when this is to be ended with, followed by the sprint theme, right? So what is that? Because there is an option. So there is a process normally we follow. So when we are implementing in Scrum and all, first is theme, next is epic, next is story, I mean to say user story, task, subtask, right? So this is the process: theme, epic, story, user story, task, and subtask. This is how generally the process one has to follow, right? So this is where we need to mention the sprint theme, all that. Next, velocity tracking. Velocity tracking means based on the previous work, what we have done, how many more sprints will be taken for us to reach the release planning part, right? So this is where generally this velocity tracking comes into picture. So velocity tracking is something essentially required so that we can project how many more sprints will it be taken for us to complete the release planning, because release planning date was already fixed. We have to make sure that we have to reach that release planning for sure, right? So that's what something which we have to be ensured here. Next, we need to mention the adjusted velocity tracking, etc. All that. Next, capacity planning, because when we are working on the sprint planning, it's always important for us to do some current sprint planning, right? So how many number of people we have, right? So how many days these people are. There is a calculation we do in capacity planning calculation. This is all something a practical approach, because if you want to learn practically, then you need to attend the full this thing, right? So then you will be knowing about how this can be implemented practically. So capacity planning we have to do. So whatever the current sprint and previous sprint comparison, how many number of days do we have? So what's the team capacity? How many days these people are available, right? So all these things we need to be mentioned under the capacity plan. So once the capacity planning, what are the potential risks which are involved, right? So, and how this risk mitigation planning we are doing, okay? For example, if you have taken risk as an example, as in when given here. So for example, team has a small buffer than they're expected. This is what the risk. So what was the mitigation? So mitigation plan is to need to move low priority work logs to the backlog. That's where generally the mitigation strategy or the plan we are making of. This is where generally the potential risks, everything will be updated in this. After that, whatever the resources do we have, because whatever the sprint board and retrospective resources do we have to perform the sprint planning resources, if you have any, followed by any kind of team resources. All these things has to be updated whenever we are working on the sprint planning. This is the one which normally important for us when we are working on the projects, especially on Jira, when we are connecting to Confluence and all. Sprint planning is something which normally we have to perform. So being a product owner, this will be initiated, followed by the team members as well as the Scrum Master will also be a participants in this. This is what and how usually the sprint planning documentation will be prepared in real life. So when we follow Confluence documentation, okay, when we are following Confluence as a documentation page, this is what something which normally we use it. So once it is done, so that you can publish it, So once it is published, this can be appeared and this can be viewed by all the team members. So followed by this, so that they will be knowing about what is that we have planned and what is that we are supposed to execute. Right? So this is all about this video. If you have any questions, if you have any queries in regard to this, please reach out to the contact details, which will be provided in below to this video. Thank you.